Okay, so Roman numeral 1, the Cold War begins. What we see here on your slide is you see two people. You see Harry Truman on the left, and you see Joseph Stalin on the right. So let's talk about the Cold War. What is the Cold War? I'm asking. Yeah, it is a huge showdown, right, between the United States and the Soviet Union. That's why I have these two pictures here. Is that during the Cold War, for about 45 years or so, the world is going to be a bipolar world. That means it's divided into two camps, really. On one side, you have the United States, called the First World, and all of its allies. So the UK, France, Western Germany, etc., they're all First World countries, and they're all going to be capitalistic countries and democratic countries, all aligned together. On the other side, you've got the Soviet Union and all of their allies, and they're called Second World countries. That's exactly right. Second World countries are all going to be communistic. And then we have Third World countries, and Third World countries are non-aligned countries. They're not communist, they're not capitalist, they're the battleground of the Cold War. So when we said over here proxy wars, that's exactly what's going to happen. The United States and the Soviet Union, even though we're bitter enemies, we're never going to fight each other directly, because that would be World War III and you'd all be dead, or not even born. Right? The only thing would be around would be Twinkies and cockroaches. Right? That would be it. And so this war is called the Cold War because it never heats up to the point where we see the two countries actually going at it together. We get close a couple of times, but it never heats up to be the actual World War III. But what we do is, it's called a war because we do fight each other through proxies, through substitutes. And so we will fight the Soviets through the Vietnamese. Or we'll fight them through the Koreans. Or we'll fight them through people in Afghanistan, or in Latin America, or in Africa. So the world will be our battleground, these Third World countries. So the Cold War. This is where my generation grew up in, where we knew who the enemy was. Who was the enemy? The Soviet Union, the Russians. And they wanted to take over the world, and they thought we wanted to take over the world, and so we were bitter enemies. Right? That is the Cold War. But how did this start? That's really the focus of these notes. How does the Cold War begin? Because if you remember, in 1945, World War II, we were friends with the Soviet Union. We fought alongside them to defeat the Nazis.
Not really.
Yes, not really, as we've talked about before, and we'll talk about more again. But this sudden change of going from allies, sort of, to bitter enemies, how did that transition happen? That's mostly the focus of these notes. And who is going to be president when the Cold War starts? Harry S. Truman. That's exactly right. Okay, so immediate post-war, 1945 to 1952. What war are we talking about post-war? World War II. So from our last set of notes, World War II just ended. America and the Soviets and the British are victorious. And we remember what got us out of the Great Depression.
World War II.
Yeah, not the New Deal, but spending on World War II. What did we call that when the government goes and massively goes into debt to spend? Keynesian economics. Remember, deficit spending. So now that ends. World War II is over, and so the United States is not going to be massively spending on the war because the war's over. And so Americans fear, correctly, that, oh my gosh, what happens now? Right? What is the only thing that got us out of the Depression? Spending on war. Now that the war is over, are we going to go back into the Depression? This is a real fear for Americans in 1946. You kind of feel for the United States, that generation, like, oh, they just went through the Depression, sad. Then they went through World War I, difficult. And now, at their moment of victory, maybe back to depression. And so we're feeling, oh my gosh, the Depression may come back. Because they're going to do, so here are things that we are going to see a post-World War II economic recession. So make sure you write that down, a post-World War II economic recession. Let's compare this to World War I. Was there a post-World War I economic recession? What were some of the reasons?
Factories closed to retool.
Okay, let's start with that. Factories are going to shut down in America because they have to retool. No longer can we just produce war materials. Now we're going to have to shut that factory down, retool so they can produce washing machines. And so we're going to see lots of factory shutdowns and layoffs. The government is going to spend less. During World War II, who was going out there spending billions of dollars into the U.S. economy? The U.S. government. Now the government is going to back off of that because there's no need to spend for the war because it's over. And so, oh my gosh, jobs are going to dry up because the government was a huge employer of people. All right. How many vets are coming back? 15 million vets are coming back. So think about this. The timing could not be worse. The war is over. 15 million vets come home looking for work. As you can see in the picture, there they are looking for work at a job place. At the same exact time that factories are shutting down, either to retool or just to close permanently because they're not needed anymore. So what do we see right after World War II in 1946 and 47? High unemployment. Yes, recession, high unemployment. All right, next, removal of price controls. What was the name of the government organization during World War II that tried to keep prices low and under control, inflation down? It's the Office of Price Administration. I knew we'd all get there together, right? Very good, Lily. All right, and so the Office of Price Administration. Lily is now forever on the YouTube. All right, the Office of Price Administration. And so remember, that put caps on prices. It put caps on wages to try to keep the inflation down. But now the OPA is gone. We're not in the war anymore until the government backs off from the economy, a little laissez-faire, and they say capitalism, work again. And so now, why are prices going to go up? Why are we going to have such high inflation? Tell me, why are prices going to go up?
They're not regulated. There's no cap.
There's no cap, but why would people all of a sudden want to go buy stuff?
Because they haven't bought stuff in a long time.
Like 15 years. There's huge pent-up consumer demand. Right? The Americans didn't buy anything in the Great Depression because they didn't have jobs. Then they didn't buy anything during World War II because, they were told to be patriotic and not buy consumer goods. And so now they have money and they want it. But there's so few consumer goods out there because we haven't retooled that we're going to see huge prices. Put all of this together. Lots of people unemployed and prices going through the roof. Is that a double whammy for you in your pocketbook? So Americans are really concerned about this. So they're going to demand action. And so, number 2, Truman works to stop an economic downturn. Before we write a single thing on this slide, I want to talk about something that's fundamentally different about America. If we go all the way back to, the Panic of 1819, what did the government do because of that land panic? Say nothing. Nothing, okay. The Panic of 1837, what did Martin Van Buren do? Nothing. During the panics of 1873 or 1872 and 1892 or 3, what did the government do during the Gilded Age during those panics? Nothing. They crushed unions, but that's about it. But this is going to be different from this point on, from 1946 on. What do people expect the government to do? Something. Help them. Who changed that? FDR. That's the importance of FDR. He changes America's relationship with their federal government. No more, even Republicans today, they still expect their government to do something, whether it's to cut taxes or to raise tariffs or whatever. Right? Republicans and Democrats today may disagree on what the government should do, but all of them still say the government should be involved somehow. And so FDR changes how we think about our government. Now we expect the government to do something. We look to them for leadership. We look to them to be active, and FDR changed that. And so since Truman comes after FDR, he realizes he has to do something about it. And so these next 2 slides are about what Truman does to try to fix the economic downturn. So on our last essay, you had, how did presidents respond to the Depression? Could you have done a synthesis with Truman for the recession of 46? So the more we go through this class, the easier synthesis can be because you just have more examples to draw from. Right? And so what is one thing he does? Well, he has a fire sale. A fire sale means that what you're going to do is you're going to sell everything now for really cheap prices. Usually in a business, it's right before you're going out of business, or maybe it's after you've had a literal fire. Right? Everything must go cheap. And so the United States government during World War II actually owned their own factories. General Motors and Chrysler and Ford couldn't actually build factories fast enough to produce tanks. And so the United States government made their own factories. So here is the United States government with all of these factories just sitting there. And so what does Truman decide to do to jumpstart the economy? To sell them cheaply. He almost gives them away to the major manufacturing industry in America. So he goes to General Motors and he says, hey, General Motors, how would you guys like a real big factory on the cheap? I'll give it to you almost for nothing. And General Motors says, yes, please, thank you. Now what does he hope that General Motors does with that factory? Not make tanks anymore, but look at the picture. Make cars or engine blocks is what they're making in the picture, right? And so now, why can General Motors make a huge profit? Because what did they pay for that factory? almost nothing. And so this is another big change. Remember, our SAQ was about this. How did World War II change things? Most of you did pretty well on that. How did it change the economy? Well, after World War II, America is going to have bigger and bigger businesses. During the war, why did American businesses get bigger? What did the government give the big businesses? To encourage them to produce tanks. Money, right? And they gave tons of millions of dollars to big businesses, and so big businesses got bigger because of World War II, because they were getting those government contracts. Well, after World War II, why are big businesses getting even bigger? Because they're getting cheap factories. And so think of the Gilded Age. That was the time of big businesses. That is nothing compared to America in the 1950s and 60s and beyond, where big corporations are bigger even than they've ever been. And that trend starts because of World War II. All right. Next, we see the Employment Act of 1946 has passed. Yes, it's another piece of legislation you have to remember. Hope you're not full up yet. Your brain still has room? After all the New Deal programs? No. All right. And so what he does in 1946, Truman, he has no idea how to fix the economy. Truman has a high school education. That's it. He never went to college. His first career was a haberdasher. He sold hats. What does he know about fixing an economy? Nothing. And so he needs some eggheads. He needs some Harvard-trained economists, right? Maybe Yale or MIT or University of Chicago. He goes to really smart people who study the economy, and he says, I want you guys to create a permanent council that will advise me. And so that's what the Employment Act of 1946 does. It creates this group of really smart men, and they give the president advice on how to fix the economy, right? Unless you're an economist yourself, you don't know as president. Maybe you're a lawyer. You still don't know about the economy. And so these guys, from then till today, will help the president try to fix the economy. So this is something, what just got bigger? The federal government. We have seen that happening ever since the Progressive Age. From the Progressive Age to the New Deal, to Harry Truman, to future presidents Kennedy and Johnson, what is going to happen to the size and scope of the federal government? It keeps getting. Why is that? What are we looking for the government to do? Fix our problems, which means the government has to get bigger. So America certainly is changing as we get into the 20th century. All right. Next slide is Truman works the economic downturn continued. Here, put a star by this. It's the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. It's passed in 1944 under FDR, but really it's going to be Truman who puts it into play. Sometimes it's called by its nickname, the GI Bill. Now, I'm sure some of you have heard of the GI Bill before. What is it? Speak up for posterity. What is it? Yes, if you're in the military, the GI Bill says that the government will not just pay you a salary, but they'll also pay for part of your college tuition. This is a pretty good deal. That's how my dad went to college. Right? He didn't have any money, but he joined the army, and he got the GI Bill. And so how is this going to fix the recession? Look at that picture. There's a typical college freshman in 1946. He's about 25, 27 years old. He's got a wife and kids. Right? He's just come back from World War II. Now, that's not the typical freshman today. Right? But there you go, and there he is, and he's taking advantage of the GI Bill. Because what is he not looking for right now? He's not looking for a job. So on one side of the pen, we just reduce unemployment. All of these people are taking themselves out of the job market because they're going to school. Unemployment goes down. The act says that the government's going to give you money if you serve in the military to go to college. So great, he's in college, so he's not in the unemployment line, so that's good. We've reduced unemployment. But when he emerges from college in 4 to 5 years, is he going to be better educated? Is he going to get a better job? So do you see how this raises the standard of living of Americans who never would have had a chance at college education before? Mm-hmm. Plus, America in the 1950s, we're going to talk about this, we're going to be producing more with fewer workers. The reason we're doing this is because we have a better educated workforce. Now, if you ever take an economics class, this is one of those things called the factors of production. We don't need to know that, but what you do need to know is one thing to make you produce more is to have a better trained, educated workforce. They're smarter, they have more training, they're able to do things better. And so when he emerges in the 1950s from college, he's going to come in and he's going to help America become an economic powerhouse. The biggest economy in the world. Because now we have many more people going to college. It is the expectation now among the American middle class that what do you do when you graduate high school? That was not true until this act. Most middle class people did not go to college. They couldn't afford it. That was just something for the rich. Now it's something for the middle class too. It's an expectation. So what is going to happen after World War II to the number of colleges in America? It's going to increase. When was the last time we saw the number of colleges in America go up? It was in 1862, sorry. What did Lincoln sign into law that created a whole bunch of colleges out west? It's called the Morrill Act. CSU is started on the Morrill Act in 1862. Well, that's when he signed it. And so now we have those land-grant colleges. Just a little bit of review there for you because, our final is coming up. All right. Next, the Veterans Administration, which has been around before. The Veterans Administration, don't overthink it. Who do they fix? Who do they help? Veterans, whether it's retirement or health care or whatever. But now the VA is going to give loans to veterans. So here we see this veteran and his wife. And what are they dreaming of in the picture? A house. America, after World War II, we're going to talk about this in our 1950s notes, but they're going to move to the suburbs. There's going to be a housing boom in America. Why can middle-class people, or even lower-class people who are veterans, afford a home all of a sudden?
Loans.
Because who's giving them a low-interest loan?
The Veterans Association.
Yes, the United States government. Now we're in the kind of the banking business, right? The government gets bigger. Why does this help the economy? Who does this help if we see millions of veterans buying homes? Come on, who is put back to work? Construction workers, plumbers, electricians, drywallers, interior designers, right? People who make washing machines and hoses for the lawn. Furniture. All of these things stimulate the economy. This is a major economic indicator today. Housing starts. How many people are buying homes? And so this is what Truman does to get people to working again. Right? He gives people the GI Bill, and he also gives them cheap low-interest loans. My dad just bought a house. He couldn't have bought it without the VA. He's a veteran from the Vietnam War, and he just got a super low-interest loan, right, because he went through the VA. And so this is helping people even today continue to buy houses. Yes, Ashley?
Does the loan still have the same effect as it did before? Like during the Depression, people couldn't have loans?
Yes, but now we're going to find out because of the GI Bill and other things, people are getting jobs. But the loan interest rates are so cheap that it's easy to afford a house, right? Because what is most of the expense of a house? It's not the principal, the amount you put down, the amount the house costs. It's the interest. If you buy a $300,000 house, you may pay $600,000 in interest when it's all said and done, right? It's expensive, the interest. So if you lower the interest rate, anybody can afford a home, not just a home, a nice home. All right. So now we're gonna stop. That's our economic recession. We'll come back to the economy in another set of notes. But I just wanted to give you notes on how Truman deals with the depression or recession. Now we're going to talk about foreign policy, which is the main focus of these notes, because AP says it should be the main focus of these notes. So foreign policy, number one, the legacy of Yalta. So I need you to remember back a little bit to FDR. Remember, this is one of those wartime meetings, and FDR, Churchill, and Stalin met at Yalta. The war against Germany was almost over. So we weren't worried about defeating Germany anymore. It was almost over. But what did FDR, what was he concerned about? What did he want the Soviets to help us with? The war against Japan. And so remember, he was so desperate, FDR said to Stalin, look, what can I do to get you to help us against the Japanese? And Stalin said, let us stay in Eastern Europe for a while. And so that's what happened at Yalta. Now that decision is going to haunt us in the Truman administration and beyond. Truman is not happy about the Soviets getting to stay temporarily, in quotes, in Eastern Europe. That was what agreed at Yalta. From our last set of notes, what did he try to do to get the Soviets out of Eastern Europe? He threatened that he might use the bomb on them, right? He hinted at it. But the Soviets are still there. Are the Soviets going to keep their end of the bargain and get out of Eastern Europe? Right? So that is going to be a cause of the Cold War. Us distrusting the Soviets. They said they were going to get out of the Eastern Europe after a temporary time. They never did. So if we can't trust them about this, can we trust them about anything? No. Right? So we are fighting figuratively over Eastern Europe. And so well, maybe Americans will just say, out of hell with Europe, let's just go back and be isolationist. I mean, after World War I, we didn't sign the Treaty of Versailles because we wanted to be isolationist. What did we get out of World War I? Nothing, dead Americans. And so the leader of the UK, or the former leader of the UK, Winston Churchill, he comes on a tour of the United States. And he wants to make sure that the Americans do not become isolationists again. Look at the map. What is spreading in Eastern Europe? Communism. Right? They did not get out of Eastern Europe. And Winston Churchill is afraid that what will spread to the UK? Communism. And so he's pleading with the United States, don't become isolationist again after this war. And so he tours America, and he gives this speech, and in the speech, he uses the phrase, the Iron Curtain. He says that Eastern Europe, look at that map, Eastern Europe, that eastern half of it is hidden behind an iron curtain of communism that will never be lifted. Don't let that curtain spread. So from this point on, we talk about the Iron Curtain. What part of Europe are we talking about? Eastern Europe. Sometimes we call it the Eastern Bloc, and the Soviets don't get out of it. Now, why don't the Soviets keep their deal? Why don't they get out? Think of it from Stalin's perspective. Why doesn't he want to get out of Eastern Europe? Who is he afraid of? The United States. Why does he want to keep Eastern Europe then?
More people, more power, more land.
More people, more power, more land. You're getting at it, but it's a buffer zone. If the United States were to invade him, they would have to go through Eastern Germany and Poland and Romania before they get to Mother Russia. He's already been invaded twice in this century. In World War I, Russia was invaded. In World War II, Russia was invaded. He doesn't want to be invaded 3 times in a century. So from his perspective, that's why he doesn't get out of Eastern Europe. From our perspective, he doesn't get out because he's a dictator who wants to take over the world. Do you see how we don't trust each other? We believe different things about each other. That's the start of the Cold War. All right, number 2, world organizations. Before we get into these notes, let's talk about the big picture. Let's put these in something that AP wants you to do on your DBQ essay, put it in context. Again, what does context mean? The bigger picture. So instead of just talking about the UN or the World Bank or whatever, first we're going to talk about its setting. Why are they created? The big picture. That's contextualization. So how many world wars have we had in this century? 2 so far, right? We'll see about 3, maybe, right? And so we've had these 2 world wars. What did the League of Nations and the Atlantic Charter both want to do after these wars?
Don't go back to war.
They wanted to create a world that was stable and prosperous and that wouldn't have any more wars. They both had that dream. And so that's what these world organizations that we're going to talk about are designed to do. They're trying to create a stable, peaceful, prosperous world where we have what AP wants you to know as collective security. In other words, what are we going to do together? Make the world a better place, more democratic, more capitalistic, safer. That's the purpose of these organizations. So what's that? The collective security, right? We want to make the world a better place. We don't want World War III. We don't want the world to be communist either, because that's bad, no rights. And so we create these things called NGOs, non-governmental organizations. It's a big organization that is not controlled by any one particular government. So you should have heard this term before, NGOs. So I'm going to give you 3 NGOs on this slide. The first one is the most important one, is the United Nations. So we see in this picture, we see this tree being planted, and what are its leaves?
All the flags.
All the flags. And so it's trying to show you that together, we can make the world a better place all together by planting this tree of peace, right? The tree of life. So there it is. And so we've planted this tree, and we're all going to work together. So let's tell you how the United Nations is supposed to be operated. We have 2 parts of the United Nations. We're making this as simple as possible. We have 2 houses in the United Nations. The lower house is called the General Assembly. Who belongs to the General Assembly? Every nation in the world that wants to. There's over 180 some nations, I think, something like that, in the General Assembly today. So from Uganda to Costa Rica to the United States, they have representatives in the General Assembly. And they debate things, tariffs, treaties, but what's the point? That if they have disagreements, what can they avoid?
War.
Because they can talk it out. Now there is going to be an upper house to the UN, that has more power. And anybody in this upper house is called the Security Council. Anybody in this upper house can veto the rest of the world. This was made because the big, super powerful nations of the world didn't want Uganda telling them what to do, or Costa Rica. The United States isn't going to want the smaller nations of the world telling us what to do. So that's the purpose of the Security Council. Now, there are 5 permanent members on the Security Council. Other nations rotate in and out, but there are 5 permanent members. So we need to list them. This is important for our story later on. So obviously, what is going to be one important permanent member? The US. We're on there permanently. Our good friend, the UK, is on there.
I guess France.
France is on there. So those are all democratic, capitalistic, somewhat countries that are all friends. Then we have the Soviet Union on there.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have, I saw Lily kind of saying China. Those are the 5 permanent members. Now, does the UN accomplish a lot? Not really, because does the United States and the Soviet Union always get along? And they're going to disagree about something. And so either the US is going to veto something the UN decides, or the Soviet Union, or China, or France. And so we see that the UN is not as effective as we'd like it to be, as FDR dreamed it to be, because we have the Security Council that has veto power. Any one nation on the Security Council can say no to the rest of the world.
But initially, didn't they just look at China and just say that Thailand represented all of China?
Well, it's around this time, we'll talk about it in a few minutes, that China is going through a civil war right now. There's actually 2 Chinas. So which China do you mean? Is it the mainland communist China, or is it the more democratic island of Taiwan? So we'll get into that later. All right, so good. All right, so that's one non-governmental organization that's trying to create a more peaceful, stable world. The next one is called the International Monetary Fund. What do you think that has to deal with? Monetary.
Banking and money.
Banking and money, that's exactly right. The IMF is what it's called, the International Monetary Fund. This is an organization that's trying to help the world become more prosperous. As Americans, why do we want the world to be prosperous? How would the world being more economically prosperous, if we're ending poverty around the world, how does it help America and help peace? Well, what breeds terrorism? Poverty. People who are desperate do crazy, desperate things. What breeds communism? Poverty. People who are poor are angry and desperate, and Americans don't want them to turn to desperate things, whether it's terrorism today or communism then. Right? And so the United States wants a prosperous world. Now, think back. After World War II, who was making things? What is the only country out there that's making things?
United States.
The United States. England destroyed, France destroyed, Germany destroyed, Japan destroyed, Russia destroyed. We're the only people making things. And so we create the International Monetary Fund to make the world a prosperous, more peaceful place, but also to make America richer, according to some historians. Because the International Monetary Fund, what it does is that it allows you to trade easier and helps you deal with currencies. So if I go down to Mexico and I want to give me something you would buy in Mexico. Something not racist, please.
Oh.
Coca-Cola.
Yeah, a can of Coke, right? Yeah. Yes, last class they said sombreros. Well, people in Mexico have other things besides sombreros, right? So Coca-Cola. All right, and so we're going to buy a Coke, and they say, oh, that'll be 5,000 pesos. We'll go buy. And like, how is that? I don't know. Is that like 50 cents or is that like $500? I have no idea. And so when you go to another country and try to trade and do business, currencies can be confusing. And so the IMF is going to try to, in part, it's going to try to help resolve that currency issue so that we don't have to have this barrier to trade when we're dealing with currency. Now, how is this going to make the world a better place? Well, if trade goes up, wealth goes up, less poverty, the world is a better place. But also, you can view it as, if trade goes up, then that means that Americans are going to get richer. Because at this time, who is the only people making things? America. The Soviet Union does not like the IMF. They think it's not trying to make the world a better place. They're just trying to think it's a way for America to dominate the world economy and make us richer. So already do we see, again, the United States and the Soviet Union disagreeing about things. So they do not like the IMF. Next is we have the World Bank. still around today. Now, the World Bank is a collection of super powerful banks in the world, easy to remember, and their job is to hand out loans. So let's say, why would the United States want countries to get loans? Why would the United States want the UK to get loans?
So they can industrialize and improve their economy.
Right. Think of it from the United States in 1946, 47. Our ally, Great Britain, they are broke. They are destroyed. We want them to get back on their feet so they can be a good, strong ally for us against the Soviets. Right? Oh, what about Kenya? Kenya is a new country right after World War II. It has been controlled by the British. And can the British hold on to their colonies anymore?
No.
They're too broke. We need to write this in our notes. It's called decolonization. After World War II, whether it's England or France or Germany or Japan or whatever, we're going to see them lose their countries all around the world, decolonization, because they're broke from the war and they can't hold on to them. So here we have Kenya, former part of the British Empire. Why do they need a loan?
They're starting their country. They need industry.
That's right. They're starting their country. They needed industry. Now, as Americans, we know that these Kenyans are desperate. They're starting a new country. What might they turn to? Communism. We don't want them to turn to communism. We want them to turn to capitalism and democracy. And so we need to give them loans so they can get themselves started and become good capitalists. So again, here's another way of looking at the World Bank. It could be a plot by the United States to make the world controlled by the United States and be capitalistic and democratic. Or we can look at the World Bank as a good organization that's trying to promote to end poverty, not promote poverty, and prosperity around the world. What's the correct way of looking at it? Maybe it's a little bit of both. It depends on the historian you get. Now, on the AP exam, you might have some documents that are from historians, and they're saying that FDR is horrible. Why would he say that? What might he be? What kind of historian? What political party might he belong to? A Republican, right? Let's say you have a historian who's a Russian historian, and he's saying the World Bank was just a tool by the Americans to make the world, be controlled by them economically. Why would he be saying that?
He's Russian. Those were his people that were going to buy.
Yeah, he's Russian. He views the United States as evil, and anything they do must be tainted with their evilness. So again, that's just point of view. So whenever you read a document on the AP exam or our final exam, think, why would this guy be saying this? On your last DBQ, some of you read the document all wrong about the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and you said, hey, Roosevelt started this. No, that was Hoover, and he was commenting. Roosevelt was just commenting on how bad it was. Well, point of view, why would Roosevelt be talking about the failure of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation? They're in different political parties, so you can't take everything at face value that you read. Why would this person have a bias against this? Why would they be saying that? Right?
Yeah. Presidential election.
Right, that's what you should have said. Okay. And so the last thing we have on this slide is the United States is important in launching every single one of these things. It's our vision. What does this show you that the United States is not going to be unlike World War I?
Isolation.
We're not going to be isolationists. America will be engaged in the rest of the world. Never again will the United States become isolationist. Right? We are always going to be interventionists from this point on. So, have we typically been isolationists in American history? Except for brief periods, but we've mostly been isolationist. Okay, the Nuremberg trials, number 3. Nuremberg is a city in Germany. It was a stronghold of the Nazi Party in the 1930s and 40s. So it's ironic that we're going to put Nazis on trial in Nuremberg, because it was their hometown, basically, sort of, right, where they were the strongest. And so when World War II is over, pictures and videos and physical evidence and people emerge that show us that what did the Nazis engage in during World War II? The Holocaust. And it was shocking. The images of stacks of thousands of bodies just stacked on top of each other like wood, right? Places where they burned people alive or put them in the showers and gassed them. The world, not just Americans, but the world was shocked about this. Now, the leaders of the world knew about the Holocaust, but a lot of the common people didn't. And so we think that, millions of people, maybe as much as 100 million people died as a result of World War II. Anywhere from 50 to 100 million, estimates vary. But of all of that death and destruction, this is the most shocking for a lot of people in the West. And so they decided to put these Nazis that didn't get killed by the Soviets on trial for their war crimes, crimes against humanity. That's what the Nuremberg trials are all about, putting them on trial. And that's where most of the people see the Holocaust. Now, because of this, there's going to be a movement to create a homeland for Jewish people around the world. Because what don't we want to have happen again? The Holocaust. And we think one of the reasons for the Holocaust is that Jews are always a minority wherever they go. They don't have a homeland. And if we give them a homeland, maybe there won't be another Holocaust. Let's not have it happen again. And so Britain was controlling what you see on this map, this part of the world called Palestine. It's in the Middle East. It was part of their empire. But what did I say is happening to European empires? They're letting go of them. And so Britain says, we're out, we're not going to control this part of the world anymore. And they just hand it over to the UN to deal with. And so we see, well, this is fortuitous. Here is, we've just learned about the Holocaust, and here's a piece of land that the Jews have always wanted, Palestine. And so why don't we create a homeland for the Jews? And we'll call it Israel. So in 1947, the UN creates, they partition the area. So look at the picture. You see the area in orange is going to be Israel, a homeland for the Jews. And the area in yellow is going to be Palestine, a place for the Arabs that are currently living there. So we've partitioned this part of the world. We've divided it, which seems to be what we're doing a lot in the 1940s and 50s, dividing the world. Okay, fine. In 1948, when Israel officially becomes a state, what do all of its Arab neighbors, all of them, do? They attack them, right? And the United States sends tons of money and weapons to the new state of Israel. This is how it ties into U.S. history. Why do we do this? Because a lot of those immigrants that moved to Israel after World War II came from America, or they came from our allies, the French or the British. In addition to that, what kind of a government are they setting up in this region? A democracy. It is the only democracy in the region. It's full of former Westerners. And so for this reason, we decided to support Israel because they're a democracy, we're a democracy. Right? They're full of people who look like us, Westerners. And so the United States supports Israel. Plus, Israel is made up of people who are Jewish. And America is a country, is mostly Christian. And so Judaism and Christian are similar in many, many ways. And so we feel a religious bond to them, as well as a cultural and political and an economic bond. And so the United States decides to be friends with Israel. Now, why are we spending time on this? This is a U.S. history class, not an Israeli history class. Because when the United States decides to be friends with Israel, this is going to affect our future relationships with countries in the Middle East. The countries in the Middle East do not like Israel because they see it as a Western colony. Right? It was created by the UN, a Western-led organization, and mostly Westerners moved there, and so they think it's really just European imperialism all over again. And so they don't like Israel, and so that's why they attack it. So now that the United States is friends with Israel, who is going to hate us? Most of the Arab countries in the region. Will this have an impact on future American history?
Yes.
Yes, going all the way to 9/11. And so we will talk more about the United States in the Middle East. It'll consume some presidencies. It'll certainly cause more wars. And so so it was important to talk about the formation of Israel here. Any questions about this? No? Okay. Next, we have a chart here. So make a chart in your notes. We're gonna find out who's to blame for the Cold War. Now again, this will consume American foreign policy for 45 years, the Cold War. We'll see all kinds of other wars fought because of the Cold War. Millions of people will die because of the Cold War. So who's to blame? So we have the United States on one side, we have the Soviet Union on the other. And as Americans, who we would like to blame?
The other side.
Yes, the Soviet Union, it must be all their fault. Well, it is somewhat their fault. Right? But it takes two to tango. It takes two to have a fight. And so let's take a look at this. First and foremost, the United States and the Soviet Union don't like each other because we have different economic systems.
Yeah.
What do we have?
Democracy.
Capitalism, right? Economic systems. Capitalism. You should be free to go make money. The communists have communism. The government controls everything. Do people who are opposites, do they always get along?
No.
No. You just have to be a human being living on planet Earth to understand that. When people are different, they fight. So already we're different. Next, Casablanca. Or, the Atlantic Charter. You can put either one of them in there. This is a wartime meeting. Did we invite the Soviets to our meeting even though we were friends and allies with them? So already, what does that create among the Soviet Union and Stalin? Tension, but distrust, paranoia, right? This slide is all about why does the Cold War start and who's to blame. And according to this first entry, it's the United States' fault. What should we have done? We should have included Stalin in all our meetings. Then he would have trusted us, and maybe after World War II we wouldn't have become hated enemies. Next. The U.S. did not invade France, even though the Soviets were begging us to invade for years. Who was fighting and dying in most of World War II in Europe, fighting the Nazis?
Russians.
The Soviets, the Russians. And we kept saying, no, we invade North Africa and not France. Then we invade Italy and not France. And not until 1944 did we invade France and open up a second front. And so Stalin is distrustful of us. He thought if we were really friends, we would have helped him out sooner. So, entry 2, whose fault is it?
U.S.
The U.S. fault. Next. The United States did not tell Stalin about our atomic bomb. Why wouldn't we do this? Be Stalin for a second. What do you have to assume if we're friends and you don't tell us about this new secret weapon?
You're going to use it on us.
That's right. Now, Stalin, by the way, is already paranoid. I think any psychologist that looks at history would agree with that. He thinks there are enemies out there who are going to get him. We are not helping him do away with his paranoia here. Next, when World War II ends, we immediately end Lend-Lease. Remember, Lend-Lease, we give our friends weapons, guns, money. As soon as Japan surrenders, we say, no more help for you, Soviet Union. Because we don't want communists to get weapons. But from the Russian perspective, we just used them and then left them. Right? And so if you really were our friend, you'd give us money to help us rebuild. Instead of just immediately cutting us off when you don't have use for us anymore. So according to this chart so far, who really was responsible for us for not being friends with the Soviet Union? So far. Right? Next. The U.S. threat to use the atomic bomb on the Soviet Union. And that can't be good for friendship. Right? Who did this? Who sort of threatened the Soviet Union that if you don't get out of Eastern Europe, we might bomb you? Truman. So that's not good. You don't threaten your friends. I might kill you. We won't be friends anymore. And so, wow, it looks like the United States is really to blame for this. But I'm sure the Soviets did some things. For example, what did they refuse to get out of?
Eastern Europe.
That made us not trust them anymore. Right? You said at Yalta you would get out, and you didn't get out. So we believe that the Soviet Union is not trying to create a buffer zone. We believe that Eastern Europe is step 1 in their plan for world domination. Step 2, Western Europe. Step 3, America. Right? And so we don't trust them. If they really were friends, they would have honored their agreement. Right? And then last, we see that the USSR, it emphasizes this idea of spheres of influence. Now, don't write that down just yet. Let's just imagine the world. I should have had a map here. The Soviet Union, well, let's start with the United States. The United States believes that the world should be free and open and democratic and trade, because trade makes us rich. Right? The whole world should be free. The Soviet Union doesn't trust the West, and so they say, no, we want to create buffer zones around us. So we want to have Eastern Europe under our control. We want to have India under our control. We want to have China under our control. Everywhere around Russia, we want a buffer zone because we are afraid you guys are going to invade us. So United States, you can have your part of the world, we'll have our part of the world, and we will never meet. And the United States says, no, the whole world should be open to us. Those two things don't go together. So we have different visions of the world. So do we both share some blame here? Yes. Okay. All right, so Control-Alt-9. No. Control. Now we are starting to record again. All right. So number 5, what to do about Germany? Just like the rest of the world, we're going to divide Germany. Just like Europe, we're going to divide Germany. So if we look at this map, right, we see that Germany is divided into, it's the bigger part of the map, into how many zones? Count the colors. 4. There's blue. That's the Soviet part of Germany. Then we have the British part, that's yellow. And then we have green, that's French. And then we have U.S., that's purple. It's 4 zones. Now, when World War II is over, Germany is there's not very many buildings left standing. It's destroyed. And the United States have just defeated the Germans, and we look at the people of Germany, and we feel kind of bad for them. Because there's no home, there's very few homes left, there's very few factories left, there's no more bridges left, and so we know they're going to starve to death. And so we kind of feel bad for them. And so us and our allies, France, England, and the Soviet Union, we decide that we will partition Germany, just like kind of we did Israel, to some extent. We're going to partition it, and whatever zone you have control of, it's your responsibility to feed those people. This is supposed to be temporary, until Germany can get back on its feet and resume control of its own country. So we have these 4 parts of Germany. All right. And so Germany is divided into 4 zones. Now I want you to look at the inset in the map. That is the city of Berlin, the capital of Germany. Just like the country of Germany, what is the city of Berlin divided into? How many zones? 4 zones. It's a little confusing, though, because it is deep in the heart of the Soviet zone. Do you see that?
Yeah.
That's important for later on. So just make sure you understand kind of the situation, the geography of this whole thing. All right. So the big question, this is another cause of the Cold War, is what do we want to do with Germany? We disagree with the Soviets about what to do with Germany. Now remember, Germany caused World War II. The United States, you know what? Let's forgive them. The war's over. Let's forgive the Germans. Let's help them get back on their feet. Let's give them money. Let's give them industry. Let's give them everything they need. Food. Let's forgive them. Now, why do we want to do this? Are we just good people? Yes, we're good people. But also there's another reason, too. Because there's a big threat out there that's right next to Germany. The Soviets. We need allies in Europe against the Soviets. Somebody who's going to be on the front lines that can keep those Soviets back. You see, the United States is way over across an ocean. We're a long ways away. We can't keep the Soviets back on our own. We need allies in Europe. And what do we plan for Germany to be? An industrial ally. And so we say forgive. Now, isn't this weird? In World War II, we go from hating Germans to forgiving them and becoming allies with them and building them up. Almost overnight. Because there's a new threat out there, and it's the Soviet Union. The USSR says to punish Germany. Why would the USSR believe this?
Because they were killed by so many of them were lost.
Yes. The Russians understandably hate the Germans at this point because they lost 20 million people to the Germans. Right? They've been invaded twice this century by the Germans. They hate the Germans, and they don't want the Germans to be forgiven. They want the Germans to suffer, right? And so they have to pay reparations. They have to pay us for the big human and monetary cost of this war because they started it. We don't agree about Germany, which is going to cause the Cold War. We're going to have disagreements about Germany. Next, the United States says not only forgive Germany, but let's build up their industry. Right? Just a few days ago, we were bombing Germany's industry. Now we're rebuilding their factories for them. So where's those BMW plants? Let's build those. Right? Okay, so why do we want to do this? Because what could the Germans build that would help us? Their own tanks. And instead of being used against Americans, what could they be used against? The Russians. Now, of course, the Soviets won't like this. Right? And so the Soviets say, no. We want Germany to be permanently farmland. If we could have them go back to being cavemen, we'd love that too. Right? We want Germany to just be farmland that can never produce another thing ever again. No more German bullets, because they have a nasty way of finding themselves into Russian bodies. No more. So we are fundamentally disagreeing about what to do with Germany. And the USSR wants to keep them divided. Because what's a way to weaken somebody? Yes, if you chop somebody into 4 parts, I imagine they're pretty weak. Right? If you leave them whole, they could probably come back and kill you someday. And so the USSR says keep them divided. We say, no. We want a strong industrial friend, Germany, and so let's unite them. And Russia's like, you can't do that. They may invade us again. Yeah, wouldn't that be too bad?
No.
All right. Okay, and so next, number 6, perhaps the most important slide in this whole lecture. So put a star by it. The containment of Soviets. So here again we go to this map we've seen before. We've seen that the Soviet Union has the Iron Curtain that's descended on Eastern Europe. All of those Eastern European countries, Eastern Germany, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, etc., they are all, to some extent or another, controlled by the Soviet Union with Soviet tanks, Soviet troops that have not left since World War II. right? And so we see that what might be the second step. Step 1 was Eastern Europe. What's step 2 to Soviet domination? Western Europe, and then step 3, the world, America. And so during Truman's administration, this guy in the top right-hand corner, he writes this doctrine. It's going to be called the Truman Doctrine, even though George F. Kennan wrote it. It's not called the Kennan Doctrine because you name doctrines after presidents. For example, who wrote the Monroe Doctrine? Not Monroe. Who? Yeah, very good. John Quincy Adams did. But Monroe was the president at the time. All right, and so George F. Kennan writes this policy, and it's going to determine American foreign policy for the next 45 years. It's called the Truman Doctrine. It's named after the president at the time. So the Truman Doctrine basically says this. Think of communism as cancer. And what do you want to do with cancer? Keep it from spreading. Right? And so if you're in the United States and you see communism starting to spread in Eastern Europe, you need to push it back. Wait a minute! Communism is spreading over there in Korea. What do we have to do? Push it back. Ah! Communism is spreading in Vietnam. What do we have to do? Contain it, push it back. Ah! Poland, push it back. Wherever communism is, we need to go there and stop it. That is the Truman Doctrine. What is the Truman Doctrine?
Keep communism from spreading.
Keep communism from spreading. But what do we call it? What does AP call it? It's at the top of the slide. Containment. We have to contain that cancer of communism. Keep it from spreading. Push it back. Push it back. Way back. How sad that I'm really out of breath right now from containing communism. I thought about jogging over break every morning.
You thought about it.
I never did it. But at least I thought about it. Okay. All right. And so let's give you an example that you can put in an essay about containment. Turkey and Greece. So find them on your map. There they are, right, the big arrow. According to my big red arrow, what is trying to spread to Turkey and Greece? Right. Now, it's not that the Soviets are sending tanks in. That's not what they're doing. What happens is that Turkey and Greece are broke. World War II was devastating, especially for Greece. Those Nazis came in and they killed as many Greeks as they could. So Greece is destroyed. Now, the Greeks are starving to death. They don't have any industry. Their homes have been destroyed. What sounds really appealing to desperate, hopeless people?
Let the government control you and put you back together.
Yeah, communism. In communism, it's a utopian idea, right? There's going to be no rich, no poor. Everybody's going to get a house. Everybody's going to get education and health care. Everybody's going to get food. The government will provide it all. That's pretty appealing to poor people who are desperate. And so what party is on the rise in Greece and Turkey? The Communist Party. And it looks like Greece and Turkey are going to be the next step in the Soviet takeover of the world. Truman Doctrine kicks in. And we give the Greeks and the Turks $400 million. Free of charge. You don't have to pay it back. Here you go. It's kind of like the New Deal. What do we want the governments of Greece and Turkey to do? Spend that money on roads and bridges and infrastructure to create jobs. People that have jobs and money can buy homes. People with jobs and money and homes don't want to be communists. They want to keep what they've earned. So this is a very successful way of fighting communism. So what is one way the Truman Doctrine fights communism? With money, right? We're going to fight it with bullets and bombs later, but the first thing we do is we fight it with money. You understand the idea of the Truman Doctrine? You can give an example. Okay. Next, the Marshall Plan. Number 7. Now, let's just write this down right now. The Marshall Plan is an example of the Truman Doctrine. What is the Marshall Plan an example of? The Truman Doctrine. All right. And so communism was on the rise in Western Europe. Why were people in England thinking about communism, and in France, and in Western Germany? Same reason as Greece. Because they were broke. Right? Because they were broke. And so the United States doesn't want our allies to turn communist. And so look at the map, right? What did we give? Now, if Greece and Turkey got $400 million, look at the size of the bar graphs in France and the UK and Germany. We're going to hand out billions of dollars, and it's all no strings attached. You don't have to pay it back. It's a huge government giveaway. Are we nice people? Of course we're nice people. We're America. But we also have another reason for giving out this money. We don't want them to turn communist. Successful, profitable people don't become communists. part, what do you notice about this map? Besides Spain, we don't give any money to Spain because they're still fascists, but who else don't we give money to? What part of Europe? Eastern Europe. Now we offered Poland and Romania and Hungary, we offered them Marshall Plan money. Here's some money, rebuild your economy. They're devastated by the war. But the Soviets say, "Niet," which is what in Russian? No. The Soviets say, "No, you can't have it." And the Poles are like, "But we want to rebuild our country." The Soviet says, "No. Because if you take money from America, then you're going to like America, then you're going to be friends with America, and we won't control you anymore." So the Eastern Bloc, the eastern part of Europe, remains poor and devastated. They don't get any Marshall Plan money. Even today, what are some of the poorest countries in Europe? Eastern Europe. That's exactly right. Poland, Romania, Hungary, Albania, those places. The places that don't have a color on this map. You got that? Okay, so here we have our political cartoon, and there you see the Soviet. He's talking to a Polish farmer. We'll say it's a Polish farmer. And he's like, "Hey, can I have some of this money?" Now, across the fence, the Iron Curtain, in Western Europe, we see this French or German farmer or English farmer, and he's got a new tractor paid for by the United States. And he's loving life. He's got a big smile on his face, lots of profits, lots of money. But look at the peasants in Eastern Europe. What are they using to plow their fields? Not a brand new U.S. tractor, but yeah, a person with a hammer and sickle. What is the point the author is trying to make of this thing? He's trying to say that, hey, what is a successful plan? The Marshall Plan. So if you were to see this on a DBQ, this is an easy ASP. All you do is you know that this is a clue. Hey, student, what should you talk about? The Marshall Plan. How do you use the document? You would say the Marshall Plan made Western Europe successful because they got brand new equipment like tractors, but the countries behind the fence or the Iron Curtain remained in poverty because the Russians wouldn't let them have the Marshall Plan. There you go. You just used the document. Okay. All right. So let's go to number 9. It should be 8, I think. I just edited this PowerPoint last night to get rid of a couple of slides, and I forgot to change it. So occupation of Japan. I want you to look at this map. I've put on here the USSR. Do you remember at the very end of World War II, the Soviet Union did get involved in the war against the Japanese. But what did we do to keep them from taking over part of Japan? We dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So when World War II ends, did the Russians have any of the Japanese home islands? We ended the war before they could do that. So unlike Europe, what is not going to be split? Japan. So who controls Japan all by themselves? The U.S. The United States occupies Japan. Americans maybe don't realize this, or maybe they don't think about it, but for a time being, the United States actually controlled the government of Japan. We had tanks there, troops there. We were the government of Japan. And we go from hating the Japanese to loving the Japanese. We go from bombing their factories to building their factories. Why does Japan overnight go from a hated enemy to a trusted ally?
That's a really good buffer to make sure that Russia doesn't spread communism out.
Use the AP word. It'll help us do what to the Soviets? Contain them. Yes, very good. Right? We need allies all around the world, not just in Western Europe, but also in East Asia. And so we quickly rebuild the Japanese country and economy because we need allies, strong allies in East Asia against the Soviets. Do you see how the Soviets are starting to feel hemmed in? Cold War. They don't trust us. We don't trust them. Okay, next. Let's go to the next slide, which apparently is the Berlin Airlift. All right, number 9, I guess, now, instead of 10. All right, so do you remember I told you you gotta think of that geography of Germany? Because it's kind of confusing. What is deep in the heart of the Soviet zone? Berlin. And so we see Germany in these 4 different zones, and then if we look inside the Soviet zone, the pink, right, we've got Berlin, and you see the little different colors there. All right. So the U.S., what kind of Germany do we want? A democratic Germany? Keep going. A capitalistic Germany? An industrial Germany? And a unified Germany, a strong Germany. And so the United States says to England and France and the Russians, let's unify Germany. Let's make it strong again. And the Soviets go, well, I don't want to say ballistic because we don't have those missiles yet. The Soviets go nuts. They're like, no way are you unifying Germany? Are you crazy? Germany has started 2 world wars. Let's not unify Germany. Forget it. And the United States, but we want a strong unified Germany. The Soviets say, but we want a weak Germany. And so the United States decides to go ahead anyway, even though the Soviets don't like it. And they start unifying the 3 Western zones. And so now we have a new country. What's it called?
West Germany.
Yeah, so cleverly named. We have West Germany. And that's going to be unified all together, supported by the United States and her allies. And then we have another new country. What do we call it? East Germany. Now, the Soviets don't want Germany to be united at all, not even West Germany. And so they figure out, well, what can we do to block the Americans, to keep the Americans from doing this? I know, hostages. So what the Soviets do is they put up a big line across Germany. And they say to the Americans and the English and the French, you guys cannot feed the people of West Berlin, because remember, we control part of Berlin. You cannot feed those people. We're going to hold them hostage until you give up this idea of uniting Germany. We're not going to let you feed them. We're not going to let you clothe them. We won't even let you bring them clean drinking water. No. Right? And so why this, again, so let me see if I don't know, I look at confused faces on you. Why do the Soviets put up a blockade of Berlin? To try to prevent the United States from unifying. Okay, so that's their tactic. Now here we have Harry S. Truman, who hates communists, and he's got a choice. This is the first time in the Cold War where the United States and the Soviet Union, as historians call it, going eyeball to eyeball, which means they're right in each other's faces. This is the first flashpoint of the Cold War. What does Truman do? Does he say, okay, Soviets, you can have your way, we won't unify Germany, and give in because the people of Berlin are starving? Or does he risk World War III and find another way? He finds another way. And what he does is he does the Berlin Airlift. We've got all those World War II bombers just sitting around. And so instead of putting bombs on those planes, he puts food and water and medicine and clothing on those planes. And he does round-the-clock, not bombing, but feeding of the people of West Berlin, the free part of Berlin. And so every minute or two, a U.S. bomber takes off from the western part of Germany that's free. We fly across the pink part of Germany. We land. We resupply those people you see there that are seeing the bomber come in. And then another plane lands, and another plane lands. Is it really possible to feed a large city just by one plane at a time? Absolutely. It's an amazing feat. But we not only feed the city, we actually bring in more than enough food, and we bring in supplies to help them rebuild the city, all by plane. So this goes on for several months. And what does Stalin do? Now, it's the ball's in his court. Does he go ahead and shoot the American planes down? Well, if he does, that would be an act of war, and now we have World War III. And who has the bomb? The U.S. does, and he doesn't. And so he blinks, right? That's what we say in Cold War terms. They go eyeball to eyeball, and who blinks first? Stalin. He says, okay, fine. My little plan to get you to stop unifying Germany didn't work. You can, truck in supplies again. And so who becomes really famous and popular at home? Truman. He stood up to the Soviets, and they backed down. Yay, Truman. He's going to win re-election.
Do we actually have another atomic bomb?
Yes, we have built more.
Okay.
Yes. All right. C. It's a pretty short section. Truman fights communism at home. So let's say you're spending all your time and money stopping communism abroad, containing it. And then what if, while you were busy doing that, communism takes hold here in America? Would that be a waste of time?
Yes.
Yes. And so Truman, he hates communists. And so not only does he do his Truman Doctrine abroad, but he also tries to find communists here in America. And so Truman launches his famous loyalty program. Now, anytime the government says we have a loyalty program, you should get a little nervous. This is a panic. This is a crisis. And what happens to American rights in a crisis? They get taken away and suspended. Truman makes people who work for the federal government take a loyalty oath. He says, all right, Lily, have you ever been a communist? Have you ever attended a communist meeting? Do you know any communists? Okay, you're fine. But we'll also investigate her too, by the way. So the government is going to be investigating its own citizens. Now, 200 people are going to be affiliated with communists in some way or another. And those people are fired from their job. And you think, well, so what, big deal? Well, the United States government just fired you because they said that you're a communist or you have communist leanings. So who's going to talk to you?
No one.
No one. Your wife may leave you. People are freaked out about communism. Your wife may leave you. Your parents may not talk to you. Nobody's going to hire you for another job. You might starve to death. And so having the stink of communism put on you is not something you can get off easily. So these people's lives are ruined. Do they have a trial?
No.
Nope, just a finger pointed. You might be a communist. So what does this sound like that happened after World War I? The Red Scare. This is the second Red Scare. So make sure you put that in your notes. This is the American second Red Scare, where we start to get freaked out about communism. You know today how people are freaked out about terrorism? It's the same kind of idea with communism at that point. The communists may be here. They may want to kill us, take over the world, those kind of things. So here's an example you can put in an essay. His name is Alger Hiss. It's an unfortunate last name. I mentioned middle school was tough for this kid, right? His name is, it's not that bad. All right, here's Alger Hiss. Now, he is obviously testifying for something in this picture. Alger Hiss was a well-known, nationally, a well-known Democrat who was big in the New Deal, and he was instrumental in helping create the United Nations. So he's a well-known politician. And it's found out that he may be a communist. Not only might he be a communist, but he might be a communist spy. So here's an example of a victim of the Red Scare. Right? This guy is going to be indicted, he's going to be tried, and he's going to be convicted of being a communist and a spy.
Was he?
You know what? It depends on the historian you ask. Some historians say without a doubt he was a spy. Some say, well, it's pretty circumstantial evidence. In any event, his life is going to be ruined. So maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. It depends on the historical account you read. Right? But that would be an example of something you could put in an essay as a person attacked by the Red Scare. What about World War I? The first Red Scare. Give me two, Sacco and Vanzetti, right? So here we have Alger Hiss. Now, who was doing the attacking? Richard Milhous Nixon. This is the first time we've talked about this guy in this class. It won't be the last, right? In the bottom left-hand corner, we see Richard Nixon, right? Now, he's a young guy at this point. Richard Nixon has just been elected to the United States Congress. He's from California. And the U.S. Congress, you think, well, that's pretty good. It is. But there's lots of congressmen. He's in the House of Representatives. Today, how many representatives are there in Congress? 435. So this guy wants to be president someday. He's got ambition. But he's just one of 435. And nobody's ever heard of Nixon outside of his district in California. He wants to make a name for himself. So what can he do to make his name a household name in America? Attack communism here in America. And so here he is looking at some evidence, this film, that proves that Alger Hiss is a communist, or at least might prove that he's a communist. And so Nixon takes the forefront. He leads the investigation, or is one of the leaders of the investigation, saying that Alger Hiss and Whittaker Chambers, which we don't know the other's name, they're communists. And so Richard Nixon, we're going to keep an eye on him. He is making a name for himself as a red baiter, like putting bait on a hook. B-A-I-T-E-R. Those are people who get popular and well known by attacking communists here in America. Does anybody know another guy we're going to talk about in the late 40s and early 50s who's even more famous than Nixon at this time for being a red baiter? His name is McCarthy. We'll talk about McCarthyism in our next lecture. Right? Okay. Next. Who else might be targets for this loyalty program? Well, teachers. What's that? Immigrants, yes, but we don't have a lot of immigrants right now. We'll see more come in the 50s. Why teachers? Simple. If I'm well, first of all, teachers are in unions. And the American public's mind, what's almost communism? Unions, even though they're not, right? But let's say, now I'm a teacher, see, I'm teaching in front of all these young children. Do children believe their teachers? They do, right? I have a son, he's in the 5th grade, and I tell him, his teacher told him something that was wrong, it doesn't matter. She called the Anglican church Anglican. And I said, no, Sam, it's not Anglican, it's Anglican. It's okay, she's not a history major, it's fine. And he said, no, Daddy, it's Anglican. Even though I have several history degrees, she doesn't. Why does he believe her? Because teachers know all, right? And why would Americans be freaked out that teachers might be communist? Yeah, what are we doing to children?
Brainwashing them.
Brainwashing you, subverting you, making you comrades, right? And so we're going to see teachers across America be investigated, have to take loyalty oaths, and lose their job. Now, actually, there were quite a few communists in America, because in the 1930s, what did people think might be the answer to our depression? Communism. There was a growing communist party in America in the 30s. And even if you just attended one meeting to find out about communism, you're a communist. Well, even if your wife attended the meeting, you might be a communist too, guilt by association. Right? So we're freaked out about communism. So this is the second Red Scare. Back to foreign policy. I know, it's exciting, isn't it? Okay, so Arabic numeral? No. Letter D, that's what I'm going for. Letter D, foreign policy 1949 to 1952, kind of round two. All right, we're going to start with something called NATO, and you need to know what it stands for, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. All the countries on this map that are in, what is that, mustard? Yellow? I don't know, I'm not good with colors. Is it yellow?
Not pink.
Not pink, all right. All the colors on this map will say in yellow, not pink. They are going to be countries that join NATO. It's a military organization, so make sure you write that down. It is an entangling alliance, which means it's a permanent alliance. An attack against one is an attack against all. So if somebody attacks Greece, what will the United States, the UK, France, Western Germany do? They will all go to war. Now, what is the goal of NATO? To defend Europe against what threat?
Communism.
Communism. We are trying to contain them. This is a part of what doctrine? The Truman Doctrine. Let's contain communism. Now, of course, what did the Soviets do a couple of years later after we formed the NATO organization? It's on the map. They formed the Warsaw Pact. It is their military organization. But do you see what is happening to the world? We are dividing the world in half. Bipolar world. The US and its allies against the Soviets and their allies. We have divided Europe in half. We've divided Germany in half. Heck, we've even divided Berlin in half. I bet there'll be a wall built soon.
Berlin Wall.
Yeah, just maybe. All right. An example of us not being isolationists. All right, China, 1950. The date is important. Now, if you don't remember from your world history class last year, if you had a world history class last year, China at this time is going through a civil war. The leaders of the two forces you see on this picture. We have Mao Zedong. He is the leader of the communists in China. Who is funding him? The Soviet Union. Then we have Chiang Kai-shek, or you can refer to him as Zhang Jieshi. Either one is fine. Zhang Jieshi, sure. Shi, sure?
Whenever it's an open I at the end, it's a sure.
Zhang Jieshi. Zhang Jieshi. Okay. Whatever. Right? I wish I had better Chinese skills. Right? There he is. Now, he is not a communist. He's not a good guy or a bad guy. He's maybe a dictator, who knows, but he is not a communist. And so the United States starts giving him money. So is the United States involved in the civil war going on in China?
Yes.
What does this have to do with America? Probably nothing. But what doctrine says we have to give them money? The Truman Doctrine. We cannot let China become communist. It's the most populated country in the world. That would be a big loss for us. But in 1950, Mao wins, and China becomes communist. Right? Yes, Ashley.
Who was the U.S. giving money to?
Zhang
Jieshi.
or Chiang Kai-shek. All right. So the guy on the left, that's who we're giving money to. No, Chiang Kai-shek. That's what we used to be known as. Yeah. But I guess we translate his name differently now. All right. Yes?
So one is communist and
Mao's communist. And again, this is the nature of the Cold War. We are going to fight and contain communism all over the world. But in 1950, right, Truman loses China. And I want you to use that phrase in your notes. Who do you think put this tag on him? Truman lost China. Well, last I checked, Truman's not fighting in China, just giving aid to somebody. Who's going to say Truman lost China? Point of view, who might say this?
Nixon.
Republicans. Yeah, Nixon might, but Republicans in general. This has got long-term consequences. You see, Truman's a Democrat, and he lost China. It fell to communism under his rule, under his presidency. So if I'm a Republican, I'm going to use that every time I can. I'm running against a Democrat in an election. Doesn't matter at the local level, the state level, the national level. You really want to vote for Democrats? They lost China. They are, quote unquote, weak on communism. Write that down. So from this point all the way until Reagan, when Republicans win, what is one reason people vote for them? They think that the Democrats are weak on communism. If we really want to stop communism, we better vote a Republican into office.
That's like waving the white shirt.
That's waving the bloody shirt. That's exactly right. Very good synthesis. Right? And so this is the weakness of Democrats. And so if you are Truman or Kennedy or Johnson, future presidents, and it looks like you might have an East Asian country turn communism, can you afford to let that happen?
No.
Because what will the Republicans do? They will crucify you. They will say, oh my gosh, the Democrats, look, they lost another country to communism. The Democrats are weak, puny. Don't vote Democrat. And so the Democrats are going to be hypersensitive about communism in East Asia, which is going to lead us into the Korean War. Because who's president during the Korean War? A Democrat. Why can't he just let Korea fall to communism? Because the Democrat Truman lost China. Then we have Kennedy. He gets us involved in Vietnam, and Johnson continues our involvement. Well, why can't they just let Vietnam become communist? Because what party are they? Democrats. And we know that the Democrats cannot afford to lose another East Asian country to communism, because the Republicans will kill them with it in the elections. Is this making sense? So that is the long-term effect on the Democratic Party of China. You got that? So let's make things even worse in the Cold War. In 1950, same exact year, the Soviets shock the world and explode their own atomic bomb. Kaboom! There's the picture. Sound effects are free, by the way. You don't have to pay extra. I'm sure that's exactly what an atomic bomb sounds like.
Yeah.
Right? So we're on the next slide. There you go. Right? And so now this shocks us, because our scientists were telling us that we had at least a 15-year lead on the communists. We had the atomic bomb, and the Soviets wouldn't develop it for 10, 15 years into the future. And so that makes us feel safe. Oh, if the Soviets ever get too bad, at least we can nuke them. Right? But now, boom, they explode their own bomb. Oh my gosh, this freaks us out. Red Scare! Imagine today if ISIS or some Islamic militant organization that is killing Americans and terrorists has the atomic bomb. Would that freak you out?
A little bit.
Yes, as Americans, we'd be going nuts. Right? And so this is how we felt in 1950. Oh my gosh, the communists have the bomb. It's freak out time. And so before we get to Lily's question or comment, what does that mean that we need to do? We need to build
A bigger, better.
better bomb and more bombs. This leads us into something called the arms race. If they have the bomb, we need a better bomb. Then they need a better bomb. Then we need a better bomb. Now, for homework, I don't expect you to do this, but it would be helpful to do this. Check out Dr. Seuss's Butter Battle book. It is a book, a children's book, on the horrors of the Cold War and the arms race. The Butter Battle book. We might even have it in our library. You might even look it up online. It really is a 5-minute read, and it'll help you understand the arms race. Yes?
So, did they just test it out, or did they
They exploded it.
Well, not on anyone.
No, somewhere in Siberia. Right. And so, of course, the United States needs a better bomb, and so in 1952 we detonate the H bomb. It stands for hydrogen bomb. It is 100 times more powerful than the bomb we dropped on Hiroshima. Think about that. 100 times. And so, guess what? The Soviets dropped their H bomb in 1953.
Ariel, Russell.
So I'm glad this is going to be on YouTube.
York. Please come to the main
Hold on,
office.
we're just about finished.
Ariel, Russell, and Madeline, York. Please come to the main office.
Okay, so before we go, do you understand how this is going to make us, the arms race, go when the Soviets get better bombs? But also it's going to make us freak out. And the question is this: how are the Soviets getting all of this scientific information? They must have a spy in New Mexico at Los Alamos. So we start our investigation looking for spies. When we come back, we'll talk about that.